All right. This is 2026. It's a new year, new alerts, but it's the same exhaustion staring back at you in the mirror at 3 a.m.
We always talk about breaches. We talk about the tools, talk about careers. The one thing we never talk about is the mental side of it. ISC2 actually just released a report confirming what we all feel and what we all essentially know, and that cybersecurity is taking a toll on everyone in the field.
Yeah, for the first time, CISA and the NSA have come out and said that this is no longer a quiet risk. It's a systemic risk. Mental health is absolutely a big part of what we do every day in cybersecurity.
That's right. This episode, we're talking about staying sane when the world is on fire. This is the DTF Cyber Podcast. I'm Damian.
This is Troy.
And it's your boy, Fern. Let's go. So before we get into the episode, for the second week in a row, so 2 out of 2 episodes in 2026, we're bringing on guests. And today, we actually have a local legend. And when I say legend, I say local to Troy because they're both in Vegas. We actually have the one, the only Vito Rocco, the very first CISO from UNLV. Vito, tell the people what's up.
Hey, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here. Legend is very generous, but I'm excited to be here with all of you today and talk about this extremely important topic in cybersecurity.
So I'm kind of in a weird spot because I technically am not a CISO. So I don't have as much pressure and as much, we'll say, of the burden that all of you, the 3 of you, carry on a daily basis. I just get to hear about it. I get to witness it and kind of be a third party perspective. So I'm actually super excited because I always hear about burnout. We've talked about it. I always hear about the stress. And I think for today, what I'm excited about is that we've got 3 of you to kind of talk through this report, some of this, what the study says, and going to get your first person perspective on exactly how your experience kind of parallels the report. So I guess to start off, let me pull up the actual document. So we'll have this in the episode in the show notes, but on this actual, we'll say on the website, because we'll link everyone to the website. Here's an interesting fact. 78% of people, we'll say cybersecurity professionals, report a moderate to severe stress strain. 62% cite an alert overload or even a workload overload, and as a top cause for their issues, or we'll say for how they're dealing, right? And then 31% of organizations only offer any sort of support. So almost twice as much, or a 2-to-1 ratio essentially, of people are dealing with this, the role and the impact of it, but only 1 in 3 organizations are actually doing their best to support the people in those roles. I find that interesting. What I think of is a lot of times when something happens, companies send out that email that says, if you need to talk to someone, they're here. But it almost feels like unless something really big happens, the support isn't always there. Is that, am I wrong?
It's a stressful job, right? I think we'll start there. I think these stats actually show that with 78% saying, hey, I'm feeling stressed out. We did an episode on CISO burnout last year, but this goes a lot deeper. This is about your mental health and how you cope with it. And so if we look at day-to-day activities, and then layer on top of that, incidents. I don't want to say the B word, but let's say incidents, major incidents, or almost the B word, and then getting into that, full-blown emergency situation. Those are pretty stressful. And then just the anticipation of them happening, that adds up into your mental health as well. So I think in cybersecurity, we kind of are stepping up to the challenge. We like the puzzles. We like to defend. Some people like to attack on the red team side. Some people like to defend on the blue team side. But when it comes to protecting organizations and protecting revenue and protecting against catastrophic risk, there's a lot of pressure on these individuals. I'll look back into my career, and Troy, Vito, I mean, your careers. How many times have you guys gone through over the past, almost 30 years? Because we've been in this field for almost 30 years. All of us. That's almost like 100 years of experience between the three of us. That's crazy. But over that time, how many major incidents where your teams went through this and didn't sleep? I'm sure you remember them, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you hit on something important there, Damian, and that's it. In cyber, these stressors are chronic. They're ongoing. I don't know if you guys were Seinfeld fans or not, but I always think back. There was an episode where someone asked Newman, "Hey, why is it that so many of you mailmen go crazy or lose it?" And he got this crazy like Newman look in his eye, and he said, "Because the mail never stops; it just keeps coming and coming." And if we replace mail with alerts or incidents or vulnerabilities, any of those things, they just keep coming over time. Threats evolve daily. The threat landscape evolves daily. The consequences behind those things are real. The financial loss, reputational loss, in some cases, even harm to life or safety. And we all kind of know that this security is never a job that's going to be done, quote unquote. Nobody's ever going to say, "Hey, we're secure. Troy hit the lights on the way out and we're good here." So that sort of chronic stress and those ongoing things, and knowing that it's just going to keep coming, I think contributes to this largely.
Yeah, let's back up for a second there, because you mentioned something that I don't know a lot of the young listeners really caught onto, but there was was this like 20 years ago where they coined the phrase "going postal," and that was because of was it like postal employees kind of just losing it over the stress. I haven't seen that happen lately. Hopefully it doesn't happen again, but that was a phrase, right? We'd walk into work and say, "Okay, don't go postal on me today."
Yeah, exactly. Well, what I was going to say is that there's something here that's a little bit hidden. We may not even think about, but the folks who are actually watching the wires and having all these alerts come at them, they're afraid of missing something. And so we have all this noise and all this telemetry and alerts and all this stuff coming at us. And these folks are afraid I might miss something that's going to take down the business or going to create the breach that's going to keep us here for 40 hours or whatever it might be. So what I see is, especially young people who are new to the field that don't understand how everything works just yet, they look at these alerts and they're looking at every piece of the alert and they're trying to interpret it, and they don't want to miss anything. They're perfectionists, and that can lead to burnout, especially when you don't want to be the one who is the reason something got through that you didn't see. And so I think that we should factor that in as well.
Yeah, but Fern gave us a really good stat there. So 62% cite alert overload or, workload, a high workload. So as leaders, right, what do we do to try to bring that down? I know there's a lot of stuff around AI and agentic AI to try to take away some of the low level tasks potentially, and maybe even alleviate some of the alerts. But what else can we do for, within the SOC or within any security operations to try to reduce that alert fatigue? Let's put it that way.
I think one good technique is just looking at your processes. Going back to a little simpler than agentic AI or a lot of the new innovations that are coming out. Just revisiting the processes and making sure that the things that you're doing, that the stressors aren't organizational versus technical. That there aren't things that you could change within the process that would help to reduce that stress. I think also maybe rotating some of those high stress roles. If you have triage people or IR leads or on-call people, trying to rotate those, and maybe so that helps to reduce the stress, but you also get the added benefit from that of building depth in your team. You don't have one guy who's always doing the same thing and only he knows that job. So you help to build out depth at the same time reducing that stress.
Well, I guess this not necessarily leads into the next part of this conversation, but it is coming up. So I just wanted to tag it, and then we'll come back to it later. But on a separate report, or not a separate report, on a separate site, one of the things that they say is that 29% of those that were, we'll say, interviewed, they can't afford to hire staff with the skills that they need. So, Vito, I mean, you're saying start tagging people for different things, but maybe one of those issues is the staff can't even support it as far as like the skill set goes, or even the financial part. So, I know a lot of people that work in public sector, and I know a lot of people that work in the commercial space, and it's two different worlds. And it's hard to keep talent in the public sector because of we'll say the pay that a lot of people have seen. So not necessarily to jump into that now, but I just wanted to bring it up and kind of get I guess your guys' take on, because Troy's been at a Fortune 500, right? Damian is at a recently IPO'd company, and then Vito, you're in the public sector. So maybe just having some idea of that in a little bit is worth talking about. But I figured I just want to jump in there with that.
No, you're absolutely right. That's a great point. And the public sector, we're constantly competing for talent. I think higher ed has a slight advantage of that over maybe some other public sector entities, in that we have this constant wellspring of talent that we're sort of training in-house and then sending out into the rest of the cybersecurity world. So we get to utilize, student labor and things like that, as well as these students are learning about cybersecurity. But it's a very real constraint in the public sector, and not having the budgets, not having the resources to compete with the private sector for that cybersecurity talent. And we all keep hearing, there's a shortage nationwide of qualified cybersecurity professionals. Where are those people going to go? They're going to probably go where the money is. And so that's always going to be a challenge for public sector. But I think trying to build some of those skills in-house, maybe reskilling other areas, or using student labor, workforce development programs, I think those are all strategies to help try and mitigate some of that.
Yeah, I've used I've used that strategy as well. I think that's a good approach, even for the private sector, where you can partner with the local schools, local universities that may have a cyber program. They don't even need to have a cyber program, but any technical program where you can pull talent from and then train them from within, so that now you have a good pipeline of analysts that can come in and start from the bottom and maybe grow within your organization. It's not always the best approach to go out there and find, somebody who has all of the experience from day one, because what kind of growth can you give them, right? So I like that approach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what I was going to say is, even across the Fortune 500, my peers that I talk to, I don't know anybody who says, I've got plenty of people. I have enough people. I have exactly the right amount for, my company. I think that we are really inundated with the number of alerts and all of the things that we have to look at on a daily basis. Remember, cyber is more than just a SOC. So people in other roles within cyber are also stressful. I think it is so important that you normalize what is the appropriate amount of alerts for your company, and that you're handling them in a way that you can actually dispose of them if you need to with the personnel that you have. And what I mean by that is, you can take 15 minutes on every single WAF alert, right, if that was appropriate for your business. But I don't know anybody who can do that with a people constraint. So I think it's all about getting the right number of people for the right amount of volume that you have. Now, you also need to train your staff on how to dispose and how to really get to the resolution for each activity that you're looking at. Because what I find is the people who are reviewing the alerts and all this noise are sometimes lost in the minutia of that alert and not understanding the whole totality of that situation and how it can impact. So it's very important that CISOs have not just policy, but training about how to handle each type of ticket that they may get.
Well, that's a good point. I want to tag on to that, because there's a lot of people who start their careers in the SOC and they look at alerts and they address the alert, right? They only look at that one alert, they run the playbook and they do their investigations, and then they move on. I think what differentiates you from, all the other analysts looking at alerts would be for somebody to take a look at that alert and understand why is that happening, so that maybe you could build something that would automatically take care of it, like an automation, or try to tune it so that you're getting through that noise. And so if you have too many alerts, the answer isn't to go and look at every single alert and then get all stressed out. The answer is figure out what's generating an abundance of those alerts and then try to tune them out and fix that either through automation or through better fidelity. I think that is what differentiates an entry level analyst to maybe a senior analyst and beyond.
Yeah, and I think there's an important part on the leadership side there too, is being able to give your people clear prioritization for handling these things. We're not going to try and do everything. We're going to do the most risk reducing work first. You know, if everything is important, then nothing's important, right? Everything can't be priority one. And so as a leader, I think we have to give our people a clear prioritization and some clear criteria around how we're going to handle things.
Yeah, my approach there is really to have them own the risk. I don't know if I could set every single prioritization across the board. It's just impossible, right? I can't look at everything and then start to prioritize them. So the team actually needs to step in and assess the risk and then prioritize it, based off of the direction that we give them at our level.
Right.
But I mean, if you're at the executive level and you're that deep into trying to prioritize everything, you're probably too deep.
Yeah, and to be clear, Damian, I 100% agree with you there. We shouldn't be in every single alert trying to prioritize those. But what I meant was, as you said, some high level prioritization guidance so that they can take that risk and sort of prioritize that at the lower levels.
It's so funny because we talk about rock stars on this podcast. We all talk about how we have rock stars on our team that we really encourage to continue and we rely on. And I think one of the things that really separates the average employee from someone who we consider a rock star is that sense of urgency. And I can't explain this, but somebody who can look at the different type of alerts, as Damian says, kind of step back and put the whole situation together and understand, which ones are absolutely important that we need to, bring the team in and escalate to leadership and maybe get a call going or something versus something that's just able to be automated and closed. So I think that's something super important, sense of urgency.
But what do you suggest to these employees that feel like, the teams are understaffed? And, obviously we as leaders know that sometimes our teams are understaffed. It's difficult, right? To then go back to the analysts and say, look, I get it. You're understaffed. But then what can you do about that? What do you say to that person to try to make sure that they don't get burnt out? They don't feel like they're just spinning their wheels and nothing's getting done. And, maybe our hands are tied as leaders to try to alleviate the situation. But we also know that throwing people and resources at it doesn't always answer the problem either.
That's right. I think one of the things is that workers don't burn out because they're overworked. Workers burn out because the work they're doing doesn't matter to the company. So it's all about leadership, getting in there and understanding we're short-staffed and that they're overwhelmed is the biggest part of helping. Devising a plan, working with the employees and saying, how can we make this better and reduce the friction and the noise for you? That alone helps the prioritization and helps the employee not burn out. What happens is when an employee is working 10 hours a day and really stressful, and that work is not being recognized or noticed by leadership, that's when burnout really starts to occur, that mental side of this.
So are you saying more recognition or acknowledgement at least? I mean, look, if an employee brings an issue to you and meets with you and says, look, I see all these issues, problems, you have to acknowledge it, right? And you as if you're listening to this and you're starting your career, you got to speak up. You can't just, to just go in there and get stressed out every day and not raise the concerns to leadership.
Yeah, and leadership can actually hear that concern, or they can choose to hear that concern with empathy. There's a big difference. If the employee thinks that they're bringing something up to leadership that's not being heard, that they're going to stop telling you. They're going to stop bringing those issues to you. The leaders who are successful are the ones who actually have empathy and actually hear their employees' concerns and work with them to figure it out.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say as well, Troy. I think we need to normalize saying these things. We need to normalize, staff speaking out, saying I'm at capacity, I'm stressed out, I don't feel like I can handle this. And not making those things punitive in any way, listening with empathy and reacting, helping that employee, giving them, trying to give them solutions, or taking something off their plate, moving it to somebody else. But if people don't feel like they can say those things within your organization, or they don't feel like they can come to you with those things, they're just going to burn out quietly and move away, move on, leave the company, whatever, or worse. So we need to normalize that.
Yeah. So, interesting thing is, while you guys are chatting, I was looking up some info, and so I want to give you guys some more stats that weren't actually part of the show notes. And we can drop these in the description as well. But so here's three numbers. And as I'm looking for it, it's actually really hard to find information for men and women, right? As far as like reports go. So I specifically asked for men, and so I'm going to give you guys this, and it says 31% of American men say that they don't have anyone close that they feel that they can talk to about difficult things, right? So that's the first number. So the second number is 65% of men say they're hesitant to seek professional help for anything mental health related, right? And then fewer than half of men, so roughly 42%, actually seek treatment or help from a professional point of view. And I guess for me, it's fairly significant, because it means 1 out of 3 men don't ever say anything. They don't have anyone, right? And then of the 2 of the 3, or 2/3 that are left, they're hesitant to even like ask for help, right? And my wife's really good at speaking, so and talking to me and talking to her friends, and I feel like maybe that's consistent across the board. But to me, what I'm reading here is, especially in a world like, we'll say, technology tends to be male dominated, right? Over the last 10, 15 years, it's getting better now, right? But a large percentage of these people that are in technology, and maybe even specifically security, probably align with these stats. So I just wanted to touch on that and kind of see what your guys' experience was as far as how it affects the mental part.
Well, I mean, here you need to have a support system, whether it's friends or a therapist or somebody to talk to, because if you bottle it up, it's just going to explode at some point. How many companies? I think you said like 30% offer mental health as part of their benefits. Was that the stat, Fern? Yeah, and that nowadays there's all these apps that you can probably do on your own that are actually, cost effective, where you don't have to go and pay hundreds of dollars for to sit on somebody's couch and talk to them. But I do think it's really important to leverage talking out the situation, right? They may not, that therapist may not understand the technical world, but they'll understand the pressures and the stress that you're going through. I'll admit, right? I'd say 10 years ago, I went through really tough times, especially, starting a family and trying to balance the family life with new babies at home, and then the stress of having incidents and feeling the pressure of, man, if I screw up, this could cost millions or even potentially billions of dollars. That's high pressure. That's high stress. But being able to talk it out with somebody really helped me understand, okay, here's a balance I need to have. I think those are important, right? So I hope that 31% kind of grows higher. But I think it's really important to be able to offer that to the employees. And if it's not offered as a benefit, I think there needs to be ways that we have these conversations out in the open, right? Always ask the employees, how are they doing? If you don't know some personal details about your team members, I think that's a problem, right? I try to make it a point to really understand. Well, you guys know I like food, right? So I've got other stuff that I do with restaurants and the food side of it. So I use that as conversation for all the employees within my team. What would you like to eat? Have a food conversation, and to kind of relate each person based off of the type of food they like to eat, and you kind of build that personal relationship. But if you don't have at least that kind of conversation with your peers and your team members, it becomes just a transaction at work. And I think we need to go beyond just a transaction into a support mechanism.
That I think that peer connection is incredibly important too, not just with your coworkers, but with other peers in the same industry. Professional organizations, networking. My dark humor refers to this as the misery loves company paradigm. But just hearing what other people in a similar industry are going through, some of the challenges they're facing, can be incredibly therapeutic. You realize, hey, I'm not the only one who's going through this. I'm not the only one who's seeing these things. I'm not the only one who's experiencing these things. And just that in itself can be incredibly therapeutic if you're not a person who's comfortable with therapy or wants to talk to a therapist or sit on a couch, like Damian said.
As Damian's talking about this, my first thought was, you can talk with your employees, or you can talk with management, and you can kind of go up and down along the stack internally, right? But a lot of times, if you're working remote, having those conversations one-on-one is really hard. Right? Especially in organizations where a lot of people that would go into the office tend to be maybe in like a customer service, like a support role. They're in a contact center, a call center type of environment. So they can kind of, turn to the left, turn to the right and have some conversations. But what I've noticed is that a lot of people in technology, IT specifically, whether it's infrastructure, networking, security, a lot of them tend to be remote. Right. And a lot of people tend to just work from home. So they can't necessarily just get up and go have a conversation at the water cooler now, especially, we'll say 2025 or 2026 rather, like they could have back in 2019, which has its benefits, right? Because you're not doing the travel to work and things like that. So there's this give and take. But the one thing that I thought about was you can't necessarily talk about these things, that what you're dealing with people that aren't in technology, right? I mean, I guess you can, but the reality is most people that aren't in security won't understand the stress that security brings to the people in the profession, right? And so you can talk to people and they say, oh yeah, that sucks. And then it's on to the next thing, right? And you're trying to have this conversation, but because people can't either understand or empathize, the conversation doesn't feel meaningful, right? So one of the things that I thought was getting out and meeting people. We always talk about networking, but specifically networking with people in security, if you're in security, is probably one of the best things that you can do, because the people that you meet understand the role, they understand the responsibility and essentially the burden that people in security carry. And I guess with that, I think it's good to mention some of the events that you can go to. And specifically for us here in Arizona, there is CactusCon, right? And I've been there a couple of times since over the last 3 years. I've been there twice. And the one thing that I will say about CactusCon is everyone that's in the room is in security in some capacity, right? So if you're working at a place where you might be remote, or you can't necessarily get out, or you don't have very many friends that understand the role, you can easily go to these events like CactusCon for specifically, make new or create new relationships with people. And then you kind of have someone that's in the industry that can understand and be a sounding board, but then it's also someone to speak with on a regular basis and actually make friends. So I just want to jump in there with that, because I don't think enough people get out from what I've seen. It tends to be, I know Troy's favorite phrase is security is a people sport, team sport. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's a people team. I forget. It's one of those words, right? I know enough to know it's one of them, but
well, you don't need to wait for those events either, right? I think there's always get-togethers happening in a lot of cities where, I think that's I can't even remember. I'm trying to think where I met Troy for the first time. It's been a long time now. I know I met Vito here in I'm in Vegas this week too. So met at an event too. I can't remember what event, but we met and stayed in touch. So I think there's a lot of other opportunities. You don't have to wait for these conferences like B-Sides or even the ISACA or ISC Squared local events, there's always going to be meetups where you can go hang out and meet other people in the profession. One of the things I would say, though, when you're talking to other people outside of technology, yeah, they don't understand the pressure you're going through. And I don't want to say that we have the highest level of pressure, because there's other people saving lives, right? There's other people out there putting their lives in danger to save, other lives or save our country. So I don't want to say that cybersecurity is the most stressful job. It is stressful, but you also don't understand the other stresses that other people are going through. But yeah, if you speak to other people like-minded who have gone through incidents that have stayed up for maybe 48 hours trying to triage a potential, ransomware, you kind of just bond over it, right? And you kind of understand, here's some of the stuff that I've gone through. And in those cases, you might be able to call a friend and say, hey, I'm having this issue. This is all the stuff I looked at. Did I miss anything? And maybe that person has gone through a similar experience, and they'll give you some pointers to look for other stuff too.
Yeah, and I think the term, Fern, is that cybersecurity is a people sport. Threat actors are going to change. Technology is going to change. The one thing that remains constant is the people that we work with. And as a former police officer, I can say, Damian, to your point, police officers, nurses, firefighters, they bond in a way that you just cannot explain to other people. And so police officers tend to lean on other police officers for support. Nurses tend to lean on other nurses for support, because you have this shared collective experience that only you can understand. And I think in cybersecurity, it's very much the same. When you go through an incident that's highly stressful, people don't understand, what it's like to sit for 8, 10, 12 hours trying to backtrack what an attacker did, how they got in, and why the systems are down, the pressure's on, the business is not making money. And, it just becomes this boiling point that you and your coworkers are going through together, and you experience that together. So it's a shared traumatic experience at that time, and you get to bond over it. So I think it's up to leadership to really set that stage. As Vito said, it cannot be punitive. You have to come forward, and you have to be able to put your hand up when things are getting overwhelming. And I'm not talking about in the heat of the moment. I'm talking about leading up to it. It's those soft, subtle signs that we miss that we really should be paying attention to. And so it's very important that we normalize mental health, that this is not something that's wrong with us. It's something that's wrong with the industry. It's something that we need to address as a community, that mental health is important. And it's actually a risk, because I said in my beginning, CISA and the NSA have actually identified it as a risk. Burnout is a real risk, because when a person gets burned out, they start missing things, they start not doing their job correctly, and the bad guys win. And remember, we have nation state actors, we have hacktivists, we have organized crime groups that are trying to get into our businesses. And so it's relentless, and it only takes one time for them to get in.
Yeah, I think, again, just like Troy said, making it clear that this isn't a personal weakness. Burnout isn't something that's wrong with you. It's not a weakness there. It's a systems design problem often. All the noise, the constant stressors, the constant alerts, insufficient capacity. We talked about insufficient resources, all of those things. But it's not a personal weakness, and making that clear to people and normalizing that, I think, is a key to helping people try and deal with that.
Yeah, and I'm surprised to hear that, going back to the stat that only 31% of organizations have the ability to really support people. I would think, and maybe for all of you, is when it comes to budgeting, right, or budgets. Is mental health or I know, so there's a couple of vendors on the sales side, like OEMs that I know, that they have mental health weeks. So I'll give you a really good example. Between Christmas and January 1st, a lot of companies in the IT sales world actually shut down. Funny enough, though, their fiscal doesn't end at the calendar, so they can kind of do that, right? So it's an interesting setup for them to where I think their fiscal ends in June or July. So December 25th to January 1st, nobody works. And they always have that time to just go out and do whatever they want. And it's perfect time because it's holiday season. Do leaders in security ever, I know there's not really the time to be able to do that, but has that ever come up for you guys to be able to say, hey, people on the team can get this, or a personal day or a personal I mean, well, I would say personal week, but I know it's not realistic since we're talking about the resources, but like a personal day just to let people do.
Well, I mean, you should have regular PTO that you should use, right? We do look through the entire team to see who's using that time off, because there's a lot of people who don't take it. There's organizations now that have unlimited PTO. I don't know if you guys have this, Vito or Troy, but the unlimited PTO thing, people are scared to take it, and they don't use enough time to go and regenerate and just relax for a little bit. So going through it and just making sure, hey, people are taking time off. You got to rotate it though, Fern. I don't think taking off an entire week for the entire security department is going to work. But I would say end of December, most organizations do slow down. The problem with that is there are organizations that still have their fiscal year December 31st, and they're still trying to make purchases before their budget year ends. And so I don't think anyone really takes that off, even if you as a seller, your company's fiscal year is shifted a little bit. But yeah, I would say make sure you take your time off, because if you don't use it, you're not really doing the company any favors. I've had employees say, look, I accumulated, this is another situation where you accumulate PTO. I've accumulated a month, 4 weeks of PTO, and I need to use it or I lose it. And I'm just going to take it now. And I think that's very difficult for an entire team to adjust to, especially if you lose 1 or 2 resources for an entire month. It's better if you just spread that out through the year so that you have better, scheduling across all of the resources on your team.
We don't have the unlimited PTO, but I do review the PTO my people are taking. And one thing I always stress when I meet with my direct reports and ask them, to stress to their reports as well, is that PTO is a right. It's not a privilege. You should be taking your PTO. You should be using that. You should be using that time to get away from work, to be with your family. I don't want you constantly checking your email when you're on PTO. I don't want you constantly on Slack replying to people when you're on PTO. I want you to take that time off. I want you to get away from work. We all need that time away from our job, away from that stress to sort of recover.
Yeah. I know someone that had like similar like Damian, where they had a couple months and they're going to use it or lose it. And what they did was they took every Friday off from like the last third of the year. So that way it was consistent. They had a 3-day weekend, right? So
yeah, that's more manageable. That's definitely more manageable than saying, okay, I'm going to take the next 2 months off.
Yeah. You take off 2 months and you might not come back to a job, right? So there's that. But interesting thought that like people don't take vacation, right? I would imagine people would want to get out, but I think a lot of times too, what I've seen is a lot of people in security that I've met really care about their work, and they almost look at it as if they're not there, something could break. So there's almost like this extreme ownership of their work specifically, and there's a lot of people that have not necessarily a control issue, but they like to have control of situations. So they tend to carry the workload more so than just delegating it. But the people that really care about their work and they really love their job, I've noticed that they tend to like not take the time away, or they complain that they can't because they don't have the people there to, I don't want to say complain. They let others know that they don't feel like they can leave to take PTO because something might happen. And I think that's another interesting point that maybe we could jump into, is where people they burn out because they don't take this time off and they don't take it away. But a big reason why they don't take the time off is because they feel like if they're gone, something could happen, right? And maybe how people reframe the way that they think about that specifically, that if I'm gone, something may happen, but if something happens, it's not my fault for leaving. I think this is maybe the track that people have. Have you guys seen anything like that where people are very
Yeah, definitely. Seeing people who are afraid to leave or go out for too long because they're afraid something's going to break. And as Vito mentioned, they're checking their email, they're logging into VPN. So, I really like it when companies tell you you're not allowed to check your email, you're not allowed to, VPN into the network. New York, especially the financial services, industry has the New York DFS, which requires 2 weeks out of the office a year for the financial services folks, where they can't check email and they cannot log into VPN. It's a regulation in the state of New York that gives you time away, but it also gives the company time to balance out and make sure that they have coverage. So I think that that's super important. As leaders, though, we set the pace. I had a boss a couple jobs ago who was, if you can imagine, the captain of the football team, the super jock, who was like, "Oh, what's wrong with you? Well, why aren't you checking your emails? Why aren't you doing this?" He was really pressuring people, and those situations create tremendous burnout. He was like, "Oh, just suck it up and do the job. What's wrong with you? Why are you so weak?" Just really putting on that kind of peer pressure from high school, I felt like. And so those situations, those leaders are going to create the problems that exactly we're talking about here in this room.
Yeah, you're
So
creating
it
more
really comes
stress
down to leadership.
for sure.
Yeah, and as leaders, I think, like Troy said, it's up to us to sort of model that behavior. If you're the leader who is reaching out on Slack at 10 o'clock at night or sending an email at 10 o'clock at night, your staff will start to think that that's the expected behavior, that they always need to be on, that they always need to be on their email, that they have to respond on a weekend or when they're on leave. And so I think it's up to us to model that behavior, that make sure that they know, hey, it's okay to be off. It's okay to take that time for yourself.
Okay, so I'm guilty of that because my team's global, right? So we're 24/7. So I do send Slacks at 10 p.m., 11 p.m. So maybe should make it clear that if you're in the U.S. at that time, it's not urgent. Just pick it up when you wake up. It's probably meant for the offshore team.
So, Damian, I was going to say I've also been guilty of this because something will pop into my head and I think, oh, if I don't send this email right now, I'm going to forget about it by tomorrow morning, and I'll do it. And but I try and make that clear to my team. Hey, if you get an email from me or a Slack at 10 o'clock at night, I do not expect a response from you. That's for for my own benefit. But still, I try and be better about it and not do those things. But it's happened.
Yeah, I love that. And I was actually using the delay send in Outlook. You go in there and you say, send this at 8 a.m. So I'm the same way, Vito. If I don't get it out of my head, I'll forget it. I'll
forget. Yeah.
So I used the delay send and send at 8 a.m. That's a great tool.
That's a good technique. Yeah.
I think we all do that, right? Because we'll forget. And there's a lot of times where I'll completely forget. There was one case a couple of weeks ago, actually over Christmas. I think it was Christmas Day. I had messaged one of the analysts, our lead analyst, and I said, "Hey, I have this idea. Can you just let me know when you have some time later in the week or next week?" So 2 weeks later, he's like, "Oh yeah, so what's that idea you want to talk about?" And I totally forgot. I totally forgot what I was. I should have just put it in there, idea regarding, and in some notes. But 2 weeks later, he asked me about it. Like, you know what? I think this is what it was, but I don't remember. So yeah, sending that out is probably, for us just to remember so we don't forget. But let me ask you this, Vito. What about your own personal boundaries, right? Because I think we all have to have these personal boundaries, and I have different takes on it. What is your personal boundary? Like if you're on PTO, you're on vacation, or if it's after hours, do you set any type of rules or, so that you're spending time with your family?
Yes, to some extent. I'll be the first to say I'm really bad at this. I am the guy who's checking his email when he's on PTO. I am the guy who's trying to be as available as I can for my team. But at the same time, if I'm spending family time or I'm with my family, I'm not in my email every minute. I may check it a couple of times a day, make sure there's nothing important that needs my immediate attention. And I always tell my staff, if there is something that absolutely needs me while I'm on leave, call me. Call my cell phone. don't rely on an email or for me to see an email, because I'm going to try and not check email as often. So definitely something I could be better at personally, but you do need that break. And it's as important for us as leaders as it is for our staff. We need to get that break and get away from it as well, and relieve some of that stress.
I rarely check my email before 10 a.m. I'm usually not up before 10 a.m. But I did send an email the other night at like 3 o'clock in the morning, because I tend to be up late, which is why I wake up late as well, right? But when I went to go send it, it said, "Are you sure you want to send this right now?" Right? And I'm thinking, well, why not? Right? Or when it comes to personal boundaries, like for me, I'm the one sending emails at 3 a.m. So I don't mind when people send it, right? So I guess the other side of that is, if someone's sending it and it's just their normal way of doing it, the people that receive it also have to be aware that, certain people, put their kids to bed and they send emails after hours, right? And I think something that we haven't mentioned is the way, like the personal life that people have, whether that's, family between 5 and 10 p.m., and then a little bit of catching up on work after 10. I think people that have teams or just people that are working with teams or groups of people should just make it clear to people or their coworkers, say, hey, like, you're probably going to get an email from me that's late. I tend to work at this time, but you can always email me, or like Damian said, like setting the boundaries, and maybe you say, hey, between 5 and 10, I'm probably not going to respond, but I'll get to it afterwards. Because that's one part of communication where if two people have two different understandings of the situation that could actually work together, but because they don't actually communicate it, it just falls apart, right? So if you prefer to work after 10 p.m., just make sure the people you work with know that. So that way they know that when they get something at 11, it's not urgent. But at the same time, if they send you something before 10 and you don't respond, they don't feel like you're ignoring them. Because that's, I think, if you just boil it down to just communication in general, people usually don't talk about their personal space or their personal boundaries rather, and how others can work with it. Because I think people just, for me specifically, like this has been an issue for me with my wife, right? Where I operate a certain way and she operates a different way. And then we kind of get into this little, not necessarily an argument, but a clearly misunderstanding. And it's like, well, why didn't you say this? It's like, well, I thought you knew, right? And I think there's a lot of assumptions that go on with it. So, and then that can kind of snowball into, well, this person always sends stuff late, or they never respond within these window. And really what it is people just have different preferences on how they do their work, right?
I think method of communication also matters, right? So if you're sending an email, I wouldn't expect, response right away from an email. And then if you step it up in urgency, maybe that's a Slack, right? That's a little bit more immediate. And then the next step up from emergency is maybe a direct text message to their phone. And then the next level would be a phone call, right? So I think each one of those methods have a different priority in terms of when you need to respond. Because obviously, if the shit's hitting the fan and it's 2 a.m. and I need to call somebody to wake them up, I'm going to call them, right? That's urgent. I'm not going to send an email. If I send an email at 2 a.m., I think the understanding is, okay, get to it whenever you get in the office or you log on. It's not an immediate respond at 2 a.m.
Yeah, that's a good point. And setting those clear boundaries and having a tool like some type of an emergency broadcast call tree. We had at IPG a way that we could send a text to the team, get on now kind of thing. And it was a text message, but it came from a different number and it was a blast. And so if the team saw that, they knew it was an emergency.
Really, the crux of all this is like just communication in general, right? Is if you set the expectation early, like what Damian said, I'd never really thought about. Like you send an email and just get to it, because like I've been in sales for so long. If I get an email, like my natural knee-jerk response is to answer it right away, because the reality is if someone's calling you or texting you or emailing you, doesn't matter. They need something. And if you're in sales and you don't pick up the phone, well, guess what? Like they're going to call the next person on their list because you couldn't do it. I mean, people do it all the time. Like you want to order a pizza, it's an hour long wait. And you're like, no, I'm just going to go to a different place. Right. So people have a short attention span or a short like window to be willing to wait for certain things. So a lot of times if you're in sales, you tend to just like knee jerk respond, and you could be at like your kid's like recital. And then you're looking over at your wife and she's like looking at your phone. You're just like, I got to do this real quick. Right. So it's, I guess there's that, but I never really thought that email is like low priority, Slack, text, phone call. But to me, everything's a priority. Right. But I think if you look at it through the lens of people in the security profession, maybe there's just a good way to set like that sort of, what Damian described as like just a process for how people work. Like if I send an email, people know that it's not urgent. If I'm calling, please pick up, right? So maybe that just goes back to not necessarily setting boundaries, but setting expectations and just kind of going with that.
Fern, you know what's really interesting is that my wife's also a CISO, and so you just mentioned something so funny to me because we're at our kids' golf tournament or something. We're all looking at our phones, and we look at each other like, "What are you doing?" We're working, but we're not working, and so it is a habit I think that we should break. But we are on call, and we have jobs that can be emergent. So I think it's just funny the dynamic that you have when you work in this field that you're looking at your phone all the time.
Well, so what you're saying is that you have an automatic benefit because you have that peer-to-peer discussion where you can like de-stress every day from your job.
Absolutely.
And she gets it, right?
Yeah, I think that's the most important part is Shannon actually gets it, whereas other people that may not be in security are just like, why are you always working? Or someone that's not in sales is like, why are you always trying to sell something? And it's like, these bills don't pay themselves, right? And if
so the funny thing is, like, if I'm looking at my phone, my wife knows when it's work because like if I'm stressed out or I'm just annoyed, I have this look on my face, and she's like, "Uh-oh, what's wrong?" I'm like, "Oh, it's just work," and she goes, "I know." Like she could tell that I'm just annoyed at either annoyed or just stressed out about this message that I just got. So it's interesting. She can pick up on those things, but she doesn't understand, right? The actual severity of what I'm dealing with.
Has she ever said, "Oh, it looks like Fern's texting you again"?
No, usually that's an easy one. So
yeah. It's like,
what are you guys?
Something funny just happened, or something, some crazy story just came through.
Well, here's a good. I would say here's a good measurement for your teams, right? I think if you're having high turnover, well, maybe there's something wrong in terms of levels of stress, level of work, opportunities. Maybe we haven't given enough opportunities. So I think one of the things to keep track of would be that turnover rate. If you have a lot of, on the other side of it, it's great to have people stick around a long time, but it's also not good for the teams to either not move people up and out and then get some new blood in. So I think there's a balance there of like turnover rate. You don't want to have a huge high turnover rate because that would imply bad culture or a stressful environment. And then you also don't want to have a stagnant workforce.
Yeah, I think it's on us leaders to set that culture, right? We talk about this on a lot of our different podcasts, but we are the lightning rod. We are the example. As Vito said, we have to walk the walk as well. And if you have high turnover, it could be because your company just can't pay enough to keep talent. We see that quite a lot in the industry, but it might be more systemic. Look at your culture. And what we do is real 360 reviews. Ask for peer feedback from people outside of the cybersecurity department or, outside or even inside your department, and try to find out where that systemic challenge is coming from. It could be burnout. It could be culture. It could be a toxic employee. There's so many things, but you have to listen to others and get out of your own way and find that challenge and then address it.
I'm curious how you are, either of you, any of you, how you're talking about these things proactively with your team. Are we talking about burnout? Are we talking about mental health? Because if we're waiting until we have turnover, until somebody quits to talk about it, we're being reactive. We're doing incident response. We're not doing prevention. We want to get to the point where we're preventing this burnout, or we're helping people reduce this stress. So what are your strategies for dealing with that?
I think you have to be talking to your teams. So if you're not having one-on-ones, I know some departments are really large and that's difficult to do, and we all get busy. But I mean, you should really know. I mean, it goes back to the point I made earlier. Try to personally understand your team and try to draw those personal connections, because I think having the conversations early about, how are things going? How's your family? How many times do we ask that of our team members? Probably not enough, right? Even if you do it, you probably don't do it enough. And so that being conscious of trying to really learn that person and understand what their preferences are, what stresses them out, where they get joy in their personal life and in the workplace, would kind of give you a sense of, hey, this person is not doing well. Maybe we need to be proactive to suggest that they take some time off, or reward them with something. Maybe they did something amazing that we just haven't recognized. I think that's one area that we as leaders don't do enough of as well, is recognizing our team and accomplishments. So Vito, I think you're absolutely right. We got to be ahead of it. We can't be reactive. And I think these are some of the tips that I would encourage a lot of leaders do. Not even leaders, right? I think if you're an analyst and you're starting out in the space, don't be shy to have these personal conversations with your peers to try to get to know them better. And even, I appreciate when I'm interviewing, let's say somebody for an intern position, and I ask them, questions about what they know, what they want to know, what they want to learn. And then I turn it around to them to ask me questions. As soon as they turn it into, what do you like to do? More of a softer approach versus how do I succeed? Mm-hmm. I know that person is personally vested and really wants to get to know me and wants to get to know the rest of their team members. And I think that's a great approach strategy. If somebody says, hey, do you have any questions at the end of an interview? Get to know the person that's interviewing you. If you haven't already cyberstalked them. A lot of them have already cyberstalked me and said, hey, I listened to this podcast episode and you said this. What did you mean? And I'm blown away by that. I don't know if that's that's an insider trick, but if you're going to interview with me and you're listening to this, mention this and you might win some.
I think one of the most important things is transparency, right? So, being able to have these discussions with your team. There's a lot of leaders who are just really scared to talk about burnout and culture because they don't want to touch that subject. And having that transparency and talking about it and bringing it up and being a resource for people, and also the business having an EAP, an employee assistance program that can, have some mental health options for folks who, it could be, and a lot of times it is, personal. Something in that employee's personal life is driving them to be burnout at work as well, because there's stress at home and there's stress at work, and those two compounding, it's exponential, not linear. So it's very important that leaders understand that. I think team building is so important. We used to do several team building events throughout the year, even a team-wide Kahoot, which is like a trivia game online, because a lot of us are working from home now. It's hard to get into the same place at one time. But being able to do virtual, escape rooms, or to do a Kahoot or something like that, to bring people together to laugh and have a good time together for 30 minutes, an hour. It's so important in the grand scheme of things that you have this rapport. And then your employees feel a little bit more comfortable about talking to you about the hard things that they're dealing with.
Obviously, like I said earlier, is like I'm not in the same role that you guys have, so I don't ever have like a conversation with like a team member or like someone that reports to people on my team, right? So what I was thinking about though is what Damian was saying about talking to people about their situations, and I think I guess I'll ask you guys is, a lot of times when people say, hey, how are you doing? The response is, oh, I'm good. Right. Or I call it like a drive-by conversation, where it's just like you see someone and then you just like keep it moving. And I've seen it where like someone's dealing with something, right? Like a death, cancer, like very serious things. And you say, hey, how's it going? They say, oh, we're good. Like, I'm fine. And the reality is they're not, but they're not actually ever going to say that, right? Whether they feel comfortable
I think it depends on your relationship, right? So, I mean, you're not obviously going to disclose all of your family issues Because can you imagine you in passing, you're like, hey, how you doing? And next thing you know, you get a whole sob story for the next hour. If the relationship's not like that, you're probably not going to have that type of conversation. But you don't, Fern, you don't need to have employees or a team, right? You've talked to us. I know you've talked to Troy, talked to me about stuff that you're going through. So I mean, that's normal, right? Because we're all peers. We're all talking every week, and it may not be podcast related, but there's still stuff going on in your personal life that you need to, talk to somebody about. So if your wife ever says, hey, you never tell me what you're thinking, you can say, well, Damian and Troy know.
They know all my crazy life secrets. But yeah, no, I do talk about like some of the things that I'm dealing with, right? Which is just like work related or like just getting in front of people, trying to have certain conversations. But I guess what I was thinking more so was for leaders, is it okay to ask someone like, hey, like, tell me something that's going on that's not going the way you want, right? Like almost like proactively, instead of saying, hey, how's it going, and leaving it up to them to give you the bad news. Because, most people in security almost have like I don't want to say most, I'm just going to rephrase. I'm going to say, for me, if I was an analyst, delivering bad news is never a good conversation. So you kind of just try and stay away from it if it's possible. And obviously the ways around that is the leadership kind of enforces or they encourage people to speak up, right? So that's one thing where maybe it doesn't come up. But if you're talking with someone and they're not willingly opening up about things that they're going through, is it okay to say, hey, like, just, tell me something that's not going the way that you would have hoped, personal or work?
Again, it depends on your relationship, right? You don't want to force a conversation. I would never force an employee to tell me stuff they don't want to tell me. That's just not, that's probably bad, right? They probably feel more stressed out. Some people, if they're really personal and they don't want to disclose certain things, that's fine, right? But at least understand, even if you tell me, hey, I'm having some issues, can I have some time? That's great. If you're approaching somebody like Fern from a sales perspective, what annoys me the most is when somebody tries to force a conversation, right? So if a salesperson is trying to naturally just become my friend and we don't have that relationship, I'd be like, this is awkward, right? Because we haven't even had that conversation and I really don't know you. And you're essentially trying to go to third base without, getting that at bat.
Yeah. You instead of going to the first plate, you're just running straight to third. You skip first and second. Like it's not counterclockwise. Or I guess it's clockwise.
I do think also going back to what Damian was saying about getting to know your people, getting to know the things they're interested in, and those things. When you know somebody on a more personal level, you can also recognize some of the nonverbals. They may not say that there's something wrong, but when you know someone a little more intimately or a little more personally, you can tell when they're not their normal self, when they're not how they are, and they may need a little extra support, or they may need a little extra help with something. And so you can be a little more tuned into some of those nonverbal cues that might show you, hey, this employee is under some mental stress or needs some additional support there.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because in the past I've seen performance of employees kind of degrade for whatever reason. And the point is not to ignore it, but to ask the employee, hey, usually you pick up on these things and you run with them, but I noticed that you kind of, you've gone soft, or you haven't followed up with them lately. Is everything okay? I've had that conversation with an employee in the past, and they said, yeah, you know what, actually my wife got laid off and there's stuff going on. So I kind of picked up on something else was going on, because it's not in character for that person to miss certain things. And if you have those conversations, well, okay, great. I just want to let you know that you are missing these things, and I could see it, and the rest of the team can see it. I get you have problems at home. Let me see if I can help you in a different way. Maybe there's somebody else that can step up and help. So I think Vito, you're precisely right. You got to get to know your team, because there may be something that they're not saying, but you can pick up on that's just not right. Something else is going on.
We covered a lot of different things, right? Got a lot of stats in there. We got a lot of good stories. So here's something too, is that it wasn't on the list, right? But I was thinking about it because I saw something recently where someone was making fun of a woman in we'll say somewhat tech related, right? And I saw it, and so obviously I saw it on LinkedIn, and I spoke up and I said, it's like, hey, like there's and so Lester, right, from ASU has kind of told me a situation as well that he's dealt with in the past. And I think it's not on the list, but I think it's important to like call out is that there are not very women in cybersecurity, right? And obviously Troy's wife, right? And I think one of the things that I noticed is that a lot of women in cybersecurity don't necessarily speak up about the things that they're dealing with to some of their leadership, right? And so specifically with like Lester, someone was saying something to a coworker, and it was very derogatory. So he kind of spoke up and said something about it. So for the entire show, we've really talked about like what men deal with, because that's kind of what I was able to find the stats. So maybe just to wrap it up is, what are some good ways that you guys have kind of helped like support like even women in the space, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so Fern, I think I'm just going to jump in there because I think I've been talking about both men and women this entire episode, nothing specific for men. I think that we really have to open doors and help women climb the ladder as well, because what happens is you're spot on. They're in a male dominated field. They feel like if they speak out, they become a squeaky wheel. They may not have the other opportunities that the men do and may be punished. We have to be able to create an environment where women feel safe to express themselves as they would in any other role or in any other field. And I think that's so important. We do need to encourage the next generation of cyber warriors and getting more girls in STEM roles. It's a passion project for me and my wife. She wrote the book on it, and we try to help. And so I think it really is about everybody in the industry taking account of the fact that we need more diversity and more women in these roles. And that it's not just because they don't want the roles, it's because that we've put up these barriers that subconsciously that we don't even realize. And so I think as leaders, we have to create an environment for everyone to feel like they can come to work and express themselves and be safe to, bring these things up to leadership.
Yeah, 100%, right? I think there's a lot of there are differences, right? I want to say there's no difference between male and female. There are differences in the way we kind of express ourselves, even across cultures, right? There's different ways that we kind of express ourselves, and I think that diversity is extremely important to make sure that we have different ways to communicate, different ways to think, different ways to innovate. And if we are stuck in really just this male dominated tech world, I think we're missing out a lot of different thoughts, a lot of different ways to manage. And I think there's a lot of benefits for female leaders because they're more empathetic than most men, I think, right? And I don't want to stereotype it, but honestly, we know, Fern, we know some really great female CISOs in Arizona. I don't know what the stat is, but I'm pretty sure that's it's up there, right? I don't think you don't see a lot of females climb like Troy was saying, but we've seen a lot more recently, and I think that's only gonna grow. I think there's gonna be parity. I'm hoping there'll be parity coming up.
Yeah, and I'll just echo what Damian and Troy have said. It's absolutely important. We need to keep encouraging diversity in cybersecurity. The more different perspectives we have, the more different life experiences we have, the stronger that's going to make our teams. The more outlooks, the more perspectives we're going to get from that. And I think, like I said earlier, we just need to keep creating spaces where we normalize speaking out about these things for everybody, as Troy said, whether you're male or female. These have to be accepted. These have to be things that people see that it's okay for me to speak up. It's okay for me to say something. And we need to continue to do that as leaders.
Yeah, and I don't think speaking about challenges and stress and mental health, I don't think that's a weakness, right? I think that makes you stronger. So don't be scared to ask for help and start to talk through some of the issues that you're dealing with. So if you're feeling overworked or you're feeling alert fatigue, I think that's normal in a lot of cases. I think the stats show that. So I don't want people to think, hey, I'm the only one feeling like this, so I shouldn't say anything. That's the absolute worst thing you could do.
Right. Or think that by sharing it, it becomes someone else's burden. I think a lot of times people don't say anything because they don't want to put the stress on someone else. Like my wife specifically, she, whenever people call her, they tend to not necessarily vomit, like emotionally vomit. I forget the phrase that she uses, but she always feels like drained after she talks to certain people because they just tend to just like tell her things that, not necessarily stress her out, but kind of as she calls it, drains her energy. And I think most people don't necessarily feel that. Like she's very in tune with her emotions. So I think she has it a lot more than I do because she calls me a robot. But I think it's also important to say that like, just because you share something with someone isn't going to ruin their day. And if anything, for me personally, a really good friend of mine, he just found out let me back up. So his wife texted me and said, hey, can you talk to him? And I'm like, yeah, what's going on? And she's like, well, they found out his mother has 5 tumors. It's not looking good. And he's going crazy. So I called him. He didn't pick up. Called him again. Didn't pick up. Text him. I was like, hey, where are you at? And he's like, hey, I'm busy doing stuff. Right. And it's like, I know where he's at because I'm talking to his wife and he's purposely like not talking. And it's almost like, I know what's going on. So I'm trying to do my best to help him because, she let me know. And then he finally texted me like 3 days later and he kind of told me what was going on, but it was clear to me that like he wasn't willing to ask for help or reach out to people, even to like his best friend. Right. So I think it's important that even if you assume that your best friends would tell you certain things, it's very possible that they wouldn't. Right. So it's not abnormal to think that someone that you work with would openly tell you certain things that are going on with them, that they will, right? So I just wanted to point that out because I would have thought like, my best friend would have like picked up the phone and said something, but he didn't. And here I am trying to, talk and figure out how I can help. And I'm not getting it back, right? So I think that's another thing too. It just goes back to people maybe don't feel like they have anyone to talk to, but even when they do, they have to be willing to talk about it. So I think maybe the biggest part here is for everyone personally to think like, I have to be willing to speak to others about what I'm dealing with and understand that it's not a burden to them. And that if anything, it's just a way to kind of lift the weight off of our chest personally or our shoulders or whatever phrases that you go by, and feel better about it and essentially move forward with less stress and knowing that people that you work with, people that are your family, people that are your friends, they want to help you genuinely. But part of that is you have to do your part of speaking up, right? So maybe that's the main part is if you're dealing with something, speak up. Because people always want to help, but they don't know what's going on, so they can't necessarily help if they don't understand.
Yeah, and I think on the listener side too, it's important to understand that sometimes help to the person that's telling you something is just listening. They don't necessarily want you to fix the problem. They don't necessarily want you to offer a solution. Sometimes they just want to talk about it. And I get this from my wife sometimes, she'll tell me something and I'm like, well, have you tried this? Have you tried this? Have you tried that? And she's like, I just want you to listen to what I'm going through and you don't have to try and fix everything. So I think remembering that as a listener and asking them, how you can help, or if they just want you to listen, being aware of that.
And that's actually a good point, Vito, because if for anyone who's gone through therapy, the therapist never, really gives you the answers. They kind of just ask you questions until you come to your own conclusions.
exhausting. I never realized that. I guess I got to get into therapy. I have the same situation as Vito with my wife. She'll tell me something, and my first thought is like, well, what about this or what about that? And she's actually explicitly told me, like, I don't need you to fix it. I just just listen. I'm like, oh man. As soon as you said that, I just pictured myself like standing next to my wife listening and thinking like, well, how can I help? And then her saying like, stupid, like, I'm not asking for help.
Yeah, I think that the line of questioning should be, well, so how does that make you feel?
Yeah.
How, is there anything that I can do to make you feel better? I mean, so it's like questioning. It's not jumping to try to fix the situation all the time.
Yeah, which I, for one, have definitely had to work on, because I tend to be like, well, how can I fix it? Like, what do we want to do? Like, where's the nail? Where's the hammer? Right? And maybe it's important just to step back and think that, or recognize that when it comes to mental health, right? It's about the people, right? And it's not necessarily about fixing it, but it's about understanding and then doing your best to help if you're asked for it, right? Don't just jump in and try and fix someone else's problem. Just be aware of what they're dealing with, and do the best that you can to support, right? Maybe it's not help, it's just like support them.
Yeah, I feel like this episode needs like a sponsor. They always have these mental health apps that you can. Anyways, it's not sponsored, but there are apps out there that you could, maybe take an hour every day to meditate, or I think there's like ways that you could just try to get your mind to calm down a little bit. Or if you need help, there's also apps that have therapists now that you can talk to. So go check them out, right? I think this is something that we should all do to try, because obviously if we're not at our peak when it comes to our mental health, we put the entire organization at risk.
Yeah, I agree. I think we need to find a sponsor for mental health, right? And let them know this is for the people in cyber, or just anyone in general, really. So we covered a lot. We're kind of essentially at a point where normally we try and shut these things down before it gets too long. So we got a lot of the things around mental health, dealing with it, working with teams, being able to communicate with your teams, understanding that PTO is PTO, and that you should always try and reset or find a way to get outside of your work environment to just maybe enjoy life, right? Setting boundaries for that time, or even just time in general. So I think we got a lot. I don't think there's anything that we had planned on talking about that we had missed, but maybe I'll just go around and say, hey, like for Damian, Troy, and Vito, like, is there maybe some closing thoughts that you guys have?
No, I just want to thank Vito for coming on. If it feels like it's kind of weird, because I feel like I haven't seen you in person in a little while. Troy the same way. I don't think I've seen Troy.
Yeah,
we're down the street. We should probably get together today. But
right.
I'm glad you come on, give us your thoughts on this, and maybe a future episode where we start talking about trying to train the next generation, because I think you're in a perfect spot to talk about that as well. But thanks a lot for joining us today.
Yeah, and Vito, I just want to second that. I want to say thanks for coming out. Always appreciate spending time with you, especially in our local community. People don't understand Las Vegas and how close-knit the security community is here. You're a big part of that. I want to thank you for coming on. And I really want to just end this whole thought process of this episode with, as leaders, the onus is on us to create that culture where people feel like they can express themselves about what they're going through. And mental health is a huge concern in our industry. So, we should stop looking at it as a weakness and start looking at it as a strength to the business as we start dealing with it and making our employees better. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you both. And again, it's a pleasure being here. Thank you so much for having me. As a closing thought, I just want to say that it is the fact that, as Troy said, security is a people sport, and our security programs often fail in human ways before they fail in technical ways. Now, people take that and they say people are our weakest link, and I hate that. I hate when people say people are the weakest link. If we want resilient security systems, we need to build resilient people, and that starts with leadership treating mental strain like it treats any other risk in the environment. something that's measurable, something that's manageable, and something that they need to invest in. If we don't invest in our people when it comes to mental health, we'll never have those resilient people and the resilience to pursue long term, to persevere there.
And one last thing, if you are feeling stressed out and you think you need help, seek the help. Don't try to go through this alone. Reach out to any of the resources. I don't know if we can put some resources below, but if you're feeling like you need help and you need to talk to someone, certainly reach out and try to get some help.
The one thing that I've always done is I tend to just do a lot of things on my own, just because I just like to get them done. Maybe a little bit of a control freak, and maybe when I was describing people that don't like to give up the reins on things, I was partially describing myself, right? But I will say, I have felt a lot better when I just actually talk to people about certain things, and maybe not necessarily asking for help, but just telling people what you're dealing with, and maybe laughing about it or joking about it makes things a lot better. So even with Damian and Troy, I'll send you guys a text and it's like, yeah, this is what I'm dealing with. Like, this is nonsense, right? These are the things, and if they're funny or not, it's still nice to be able to share something, and then Troy usually sends like the crying, like laughing emoji, and know that like he's over there like giggling when I'm in the abyss, right? So it's definitely find people that you enjoy speaking with. I happen to get lucky with Damian and Troy, and then tell them what's going on, share, and I feel like I'm a lot happier than I was maybe like a year ago. And it's probably because, I have more friends now, more people that I can talk to. And the simple thing that changed with that was getting out, meeting people and talking to them. And then, knowing that you'll probably talk to some people more, and it makes everything better. So I guess maybe my thought is get out there, meet people, make friends, and then start talking to them about things outside of work. And you'll kind of come to see that you build relationships, and things actually get a lot better, even though that wasn't your original goal, right? So things get better. You just have to get out there and meet people. So with that, I think we're all set, and we'll see you, or you'll hear us next week. Thanks, guys.